It's been 17 years, but it still happens to this day. It happened on a summer night on the back road connecting Mount Clair to West Milford, known to the locals as Alfie Hill. The area had very few houses at the time, and one house stood out, a brand new gorgeous home right at the crest of the dirt road. The man who lived there built it for his wife, and they had a daughter who was, I believe, around 8 years old at the time. I remember traveling the road, more of a cowpath really, and watching the home being constructed. Once it was finished, it always looked so pristine and happy. But one night, I was coming through this patch, black stretch of land, and saw the mother and daughter in the middle of the road, both in what looked like nightgowns in a mud puddle. I could see them standing there as I approached, and the moon seemed to shine on them alone. When I got to them, they disappeared in front of me. I wasn't alone in the car, so I asked did anyone else just see that, and everyone just sat there, too scared to answer. By the light of day, early, I was crossing back across the hill and saw 6, maybe 7 police cruisers and an ambulance. Crime scene tape everywhere, and one covered figure in the grass by the house, and several officers crouched by the road, beside where the mud puddle was the night before. Apparently the man had long suffered from depression and killed his wife and daughter before running to the house and killing himself. The officers said that they speculated he had committed the act the night prior to them being discovered. Still, on summer nights, you can see the girl and her mom looking down into the middle of the puddle in their nightgowns. My husband Steve, brother, and myself were staying in a condo at Sunrise Village in Killington, Virginia, to go skiing. It was in April of this year, and there was a special on the Fox News channel entitled, "Does the Devil Really Exist?" or something of that nature. It must have really affected me, as I later dreamt that my husband and I were before the devil, and he was going to decide which one of our souls to claim. I was making an argument to spare Steve and take me instead. I remember waking up as someone was grabbing my left calf and tugging on it. I looked around and saw my husband was just coming into the bedroom from the bathroom, and he saw my distress as I was waking up and shouting for him to turn on the light as I was waving my hand around me to see if I could detect any cold spots. I enthusiastically read all I can on the paranormal. I vividly recall the hand, fingers and thumb wrapped around my left calf. It was a warm hand, and no, without a doubt, it wasn't my husband's. He was in the bathroom, or my sleeping brother on the living room couch. I was sleeping, tucked in with the sheets and blankets tucked under the mattress. I think whatever it was trying to wake me up from a horrible dream. Perhaps my father, who passed away 5 years ago prior. Don't know. What I do know is that my husband believes it was a dream, and he won't accept any other explanation. This infuriates me to no end. I know it was real. Thanks for listening, and keep up the good work on your website. It's great. I've got another experience I thought you might find interesting. In October of 2006, I got orders to move from Arlington Air Force Base, Alaska, to Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. My ex-wife and I decided to drive because we didn't want to get to the next station and not have a car. We spent the weekend with her relatives in Wasilla, then made the drive to Haines Junction and stayed the night. We really didn't sleep well that night. The room was rather uncomfortable. So we left at like 500 and began the trip to Canada. We took the Alcan, Alaska-Canada highway and pushed into the Yukon Territory, stopped, and had a rather awful lunch, but my daughter, who was a year old, needed to get out of the car for a while. We pulled into White House around 1800 and decided to stop for the night. We chose the Best Western Hotel, mostly due to the military giving us a list of which hotels were best for us to stay in, and that was one. As we were checking in, I noticed a rather cold spot by a cartoony statue of a Canadian Mountie. Mind you, this was October, and things were getting cooler, but not that cold. I believe we had a room on the 6th floor, and let my ex-wife and my daughter get settled, while I brought in the things we needed for the night. While I was making the trips to the car and back to the room, I learned that this Best Western was once a saloon and brothel. I'd mentioned the cold spot to my ex-wife, and she had stated that once she had made the trip to Alaska in '02. This was 2 years before our marriage, and I did not know her before '03. That she had stayed on the 4th floor and experienced similar cold spots and orbs. Well, we decided to have dinner, then turn in. We had been in the car for over 12 hours, and we sorely needed a seat after the awful night before. My ex-wife said she had forgotten something in the car, and for me to get it, as she was going to give our daughter a bath and put her to bed. I went out from the restaurant in the hotel, and as I was walking in the entrance to the hotel, I kept feeling cold spots in various places. I also felt like someone had brushed up against me, and like a hand on my shoulder. Of course, no one else was around except the front desk clerk. It got stranger as I came back in after getting what it was. I have since forgotten, and got on the elevator again. I got this feeling like I was being watched, or something was there with me. Now, I was the only one in the elevator, but for some reason, it stopped on the 4th floor, and when the doors opened, an odor of tobacco filled the area. This is a non-smoking hotel, and what can be best described as a wet dog smell filtered through the hallway. When I finally got back to the 6th floor, these cold spots seemed more spread out than before, and I swear I saw some floating orbs in the window overlooking Whitehorse. By this time, it was around 1930 to 2000 at night. Of course, when I looked again, nothing was there. I also heard something that sounded like someone banging pots and pans. Obviously, there was no one there, and you weren't allowed to bring such things into the hotel. I got back to her room and told my ex-wife about it, and she said she had a similar experience in '02, without the pots and pans banging noise. We slept the rest of the night without any further disturbances, and decided to head out at 6:30. While I was loading the car, it was still kinda dark outside. I swear, I saw what looked like a prospector from the latter part of the 1890s. Of course, when I looked up, he was gone. When I went back into the lobby near that cartoony Canadian Mountie statue, the cold spot really intensified, and when I got to the area where the elevator was, I saw someone out the window, and I thought nothing of it. But once I got closer to the elevator, I noticed that the person was wearing Victorian-era clothing. He passed by the window and disappeared. Again, I told my ex-wife, and she by now was picking up on animal spirits as she called them, and she was telling me it was time to get moving. But she noticed the intense cold spot by the statue as well, and like our trip to Rika's Roadhouse in Alaska back in '04, she was quick to get out of the hotel with our daughter and get to the car, while I checked out and brought the bags out. Again, I felt something brush against me, and something touched my shoulder. However, this time, The hand felt cold and clammy almost. Of course, I turn around and no one is there, just that cartoony Mountie statue. We get out of there okay, without any further strangeness, save for a feeling of sorrow. Then, of course, I found out it was a saloon and brothel from the Alaskan Canadian gold rush of 1898, which could explain several things, but it was the first time I actually feared spirits and ghosts, and that was because of my daughter, who was a year old at the time. Again, my ex-wife and I would talk about this till our divorce. It was probably the first time I've ever felt animal spirits. This is a personal experience that happened to me 2 years ago in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm in the Navy and had just got off the swing shift on base, leaving at approximately 11:45 p.m. from the base. The base I was at is on an old plantation's land, but I never thought anything of it. The part where I worked at was on the water of the nearby river, and the road back passed along the river for about a half mile before turning inland. Fog had a tendency to build up on the river in the fall and winter months, and the fog had rolled across the road on this particular night. As I was driving along the road coming back from work, I saw a man running on the side of the road. This was nothing special on a military base. People run all the time to keep up physical condition, but this was almost at midnight, which I found strange, and he was wearing nothing reflective at all, seemingly wearing all dark clothing. As my car came up on him, he immediately darted out in front of the car at a speed I'd never seen before. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I expected to hear and feel a massive thud as I hit this poor fellow, but as the car passed through him, he vanished without a trace. I got out of the car, brights on, searching with my flashlight for a person anywhere around my car, but I was the only one as far as I could see on this road. It scared the living daylights out of me, to the point in which I started searching inside of the car to ensure I did not have a hitchhiker with me now. After getting into the car, I drove as fast as I could, with interior lights on in the car, to the nearest well-lit area, locked the doors, left the lights on, and called my father to relate the incident. After some 20 minutes of consoling me, I finally got my wits about me to drive home. However, it did not end here. From this night on, something was different about my apartment. There was a presence in that place that I haven't felt the months before the incident. I began to review sitting in the living room alone altogether because of feeling like someone was watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I would see the bathroom light on, clear as day, but when I looked over, it would be off again. It would feel like someone would sit down next to me on the couch, but I was the only one in the apartment. Finally, one weekend my father came out to visit. Growing up with numerous ghostly and at sometimes demonic experiences, most of which he never talks about, he has become highly sensitive to the paranormal. The first day he arrived, he used the key I left him to get in while I was at work. When I got home, having said nothing of my experiences in the apartment to him, the first thing he asked me was if I ever got the feeling someone was in the kitchen area, peeking over the half wall at the television. I froze in my tracks at this. Over the course of his week-long visit, he said he also thought he saw the bathroom light turning itself on and off, and felt someone else sit down on the couch next to him, as well as seeing a shadow of a man mainly around the kitchen area, who would periodically lean over the half wall like he was looking at what was on the television. But he said he never saw or felt anything or anyone in the bedrooms. I now had a reason for my seemingly unfounded paranoia of being in the living room alone. I continued living with this feeling from the night of the incident, driving home through the following few months until I received orders to leave Charleston, and have not felt the presence of the running man since then. When I was little, about 5 or 6, we lived in a big house which was originally 2 cottages, later joined together. Although myself and my sister were young at the time and had no personal experiences, my parents told us stories about what happened there when we moved house some years later, as well as the familiar cold spots, creaks and groans. Some other stuff went on too. One day, my mom was in the downstairs bathroom when she heard a man's cough coming from outside the door. Thinking it was my dad going into the study room, which was opposite the bathroom, she thought nothing of it. When she came out of the bathroom, however, the study was empty and no one was outside. She went back to the kitchen and found my dad where she'd left him, sitting at the table. She asked him if he had come out the bathroom and coughed. He hadn't moved the whole time. Another time, my mom, my dad, and one of their friends were sitting at the kitchen table when they all heard a massive crash come directly from upstairs where my bedroom was. My mom described it as the sound of a wardrobe falling over or a full-grown male adult being thrown to the floor. They rushed upstairs to find me fast asleep and nothing out of place in my room. We even had the fireplace in my room checked in case a stone had fallen down the chimney. Nothing was found and there was no explanation. Everyone in the house was accounted for. One night my parents were in bed when they heard the sound of a woman gently humming and singing. The sound came from the end of the corridor and continued downstairs, then eventually stopped. Again, this could not be explained. Myself and my sister were asleep, and even if we did get up, we certainly would have walked down the corridor singing. My second story is based in my grandmother's house, a manor house which is around 200 years old. My grandmother has a story which even to this day she swears was true. She was walking upstairs when in front of her she saw a pair of women's shoes on the step above. She looked up to see a skirt, blouse, and before she could see the woman's face, she vanished. My dad's family all grew up in the house, and my uncle mentioned that from his bedroom, he used to hear the sound of gravel crunching outside, like someone walking towards the house. On several occasions, he even recounts seeing 2 big black dogs sitting by his bed. Although I like the house, I always get that feeling of being watched whenever I go over. If I'm sat in the kitchen, I always want to look into the parlor, which is next in the kitchen, with the door always open so you can see in, and I always feel like someone's sitting in there. Even to this day, I refuse to go upstairs by myself, as well as seeing a key moving in a locked door from the inside when no one was in there. Myself and my sister had a weird experience. We were sat outside. The garden is kind of placed on a hill, very sloped, that you could reach by climbing some steps. From where we were sitting, we could just see into my grandmother's bedroom. She had gone out shopping and had left her 2 dogs on her bed. We were just watching them, talking, when suddenly, one of the dogs started barking at the corner of the room at something we couldn't see. She, the dog, then jumped onto the bed and started barking directly at us. Then, at the exact same time, we both saw a white mist, sort of in the form of a hand, move gently over the dog's head. He then stopped barking. My sister and I both looked at each other in surprise. We'd both seen it, but could not understand it. It was daylight, but not sunny, quite cloudyless. There was no reflections on the glass or anything like that, because there was nothing to reflect, no trees or anything behind us, and we quite clearly seen the mist from the inside of the window. While serving at RAF, Middle and Hall, with USAF, 1993-1994, I lived with a roommate from Santa Rosa named Greg. Santa Rosa is located in New Mexico. We both originally lived in the dorms on base, but got special permission from our first sergeants to move off base together. This was due to the fact that we did not drink alcohol, and drunken parties were a constant among our roommates, and in the dorms, in general, 24 hours daily as airmen worked 3 shifts. We were both practical-minded Air Force aircraft mechanics with serious responsibilities, and not given to flights of fancy, and had no previous interest or experience in the paranormal or occult. I simultaneously dated an Englishman I would later marry named Bill. The cottage only had a coal fireplace for heating. Greg did all he could to keep the coal stoked, but the house never warmed, and coal always died out quickly, despite large piles of coal Greg stoked well often. The phone rang at various hours day and night, with a loud, hissing static. There was a faint, but unmistakable sound of someone whispering loudly through the static, but the words were always unintelligible. Calls to the operator to discover where the calls came from were answered that we had not received any phone calls at all during these events as far as the phone company was concerned. The calls simply came from nowhere. Greg worked a night shift, I worked days. Every night, I heard heavy footsteps come up the stairs to the bedroom landing, 4 square feet, and back downstairs after varying lengths of pause. When I was home at night, these heavy footsteps occasionally went into Greg's room. When he was at home, he heard the steps enter my room a few times. 500-year-old stairs creaked very loudly beneath thin carpet when no known humans were using them. The human footsteps could be heard anywhere in the cottage. These phantom footsteps were much, much louder and projected a foreboding emotion to the roommate at home when they occurred. The rocking chair in the living room near the fireplace rocked off of its own accord on a regular basis. Once, Greg and I were simultaneously TDY, or assigned temporary duty, to separate bases for a few months. We locked the cottage down tight as a drum. A friend agreed to check the place from time to time, but as all doors and windows remained locked, he never went inside. I returned before Greg did. Every object in the kitchen that could be moved, such as cutlery, dishes, pots and pans, bread bins, knickknacks, whatever, were taken by someone and all dumped in the middle of the living room floor. Nothing was missing. It was simply transported to the middle of the living room and unceremoniously dumped there. At other times I was TDY, and Greg experienced occurrences more often and more intensely for him when I was gone. However, his worst experience happened unbeknownst to me while I was deep inside the cottage. One night, as Greg went out to his car to go on duty, he saw what are sometimes called a shadow figure, but in much more detail. Greg was not bothered by the unmistakable occurrences in the cottage until he met this thing. It was blacker than black, the outline of a large adult male, about 6.5 feet tall, be his estimation. No facial or other features, except glowing eyes that looked at Greg in such an evil way. Greg said he was scared to death, He claimed without hearing a sound that this thing was unmistakably evil and had ill intentions, to say the least. Greg got in his car, a true British yellow Mini, and sped away as soon as he could. There is a broken down shed directly behind the house in the backyard. Both Greg and I looked into it from time to time, but refused to enter until one day we agreed to go in together. We both experienced an unexplainable strong sense of being watched from up close, though no one else was on the property. The sensation, we both agreed at the time, was an evil one. We both thought we heard heavy breathing, but neither one of us wanted to jump to the conclusion and appeared to the other one to be easily duped by what we couldn't explain. There's a storage area on the side of the house that cannot be accessed from inside the house, only by the door outside the storage area, attached to the side of the cottage. Greg and I both hardly dared to look inside after our first time inspecting the property. There were no electrical lights in the room. There was junk and building materials scattered around, as if someone dumped everything from the ceiling, and materials changed positions from time to time. Occasionally, the taps, faucets in the bathrooms upstairs turned on and off on its own accord, yet both hot and cold tap levers were always in the off position. Every unexplained occurrence was of an extremely strongly sensed nature. It always got our attention, except for the static phone calls and the chair rocking itself. Most activity took place when there was only one roommate in the cottage. Neither Greg nor I had ever experienced anything paranormal before. At least, he had not anything to this degree. Of the photos taken inside and outside the cottage, there is nothing remarkable. No orbs, light streaks, vortices, apparitions, etc. The Englishman I was dating and later married was a complete skeptic, but strongly disliked being in this cottage. He would only state, something is wrong with this house, something is strange about it. For his degree of skepticism, that was quite a statement in itself. When a man with a young teenage girl moved into the other side of this duplex cottage, Greg and I decided to warn her, without giving anything specific away about the occurrences, so we weren't planting suggestions in her mind, knowing teenagers are very impressionable. We simply welcomed her, made chit-chat, then told her when she was alone if she was ever uncomfortable or frightened, telling us she was in her bedroom alone when she audibly heard a voice call out for her. She had no history of hallucinations, swore she did not mistake it for a conversation she heard through the walls, which would not have occurred for that night Greg was on duty at the base, and that the voice was male, not matching Greg or myself. Shortly after this, I moved in with my fiancé in a nearby town, largely to get away from the occurrences, and soon lost touch with Greg entirely. The paranormal occurrences in the cottage were constant, in one form or another, and experienced intensely. It carried a heavy pull of fear or, at times, dread or terror everywhere in that cottage that never ever left. Never anything that could be called benign or benevolent. In the summer of 1996, I bought a large home in a nice, older neighborhood. My fiancée lived with her parents at the time she was still in college, and I was living with my parents since I'd just gotten out of the army. We were really looking forward to getting married and having our own private place. The first night in the house felt very strange to me, but I chalked it up to being a newlywed in a new home. As time went by, the strange feelings did not abate as they thought it would. I felt more and more apprehensive especially when I was in the house alone. The house made very strange noises when I was there by myself that it didn't make while Sandy was home with me. Also, I asked Sandy if she heard any strange noises when she was there alone, and she said she didn't. I tried to ignore the noises in apprehension, but it was getting harder and harder from the upstairs. There were just the two of us in the house, and the bedrooms upstairs were only used for storage. The footsteps seemed to pace back and forth in the upstairs hallway. Sandy claimed she never heard any of the sounds and was calling me paranoid and crazy. At first, the footsteps were confined to the upstairs, but eventually they came downstairs and into our bedroom. Whatever was making the footstep noise would come up to my side of our bed and stand there for several minutes before walking straight out of her room. I heard other strange noises in the house, like the sound of an animal growling and scratching noises in the walls. Someone or something knocked on our front door one morning at 3 a.m. so loud that I thought the door was going to come off the hinges. Of course, Sandy never heard anything and accused me of trying to scare her. I began to see small, black humanoid figures darting in and out of the corner of my vision. They would shoot behind furniture or duck into some rooms when I tried to lay my eyes directly on them. I saw them during the night and day and began to see them more often and often. I would often get this odd feeling that someone was behind me, and if I quickly turned around, I could see one or more of those things run away. One day, when I turned around to try and see the little black things, I saw a large, black thing at the other end of the hallway. It was about 6 feet tall, and though I could not make out any features, I could tell that it was a human shape under a cloak, and it did not run away. It just stood there for several seconds to let me get a good look at it, and then it slowly disappeared. I saw that apparition several more times over the next few months, always standing some distance away and just looking at me. I was really getting scared, and it came to the point that I did not want to go home at night. The experiences were taking a huge toll on our marriage. Sandy would blame me for scaring her with reports of things that were not happening in her mind, just to cause trouble in our marriage. She would not begin to convince that I was truly scared and that something was really happening, even if she did not experience it. We stayed married for a total of 30 months before she moved out of the house and filed for divorce. But here's where the story gets even stranger. The day she moved out of the house, the frequency and intensity of the experiences began to diminish. That night, the footsteps did not come downstairs like they always had in the past. I saw the large black apparition only one time after she moved out, and that time it was translucent, as opposed to being completely opaque as it had been before. It also did not stick around as before. Once I saw it, it vanished. 4 months after she was gone, all the activity ceased. The house was quiet and still, and I no longer felt that apprehension I wrote about earlier. I've since remarried, and we live in the same house with our children. I thought that the experiences might return once I brought my new wife into the home, but they didn't. If they had, I would have sold the place. It had to be something associated with Sandy. Maybe she was into the occult or something. I spent plenty of nights with her in her parents' home when they were away, before we were married, and never experienced anything like what happened in the house. Perhaps it was the combination of her and the house that was the problem, but I hope not. If it were, then that means the same thing could happen again, and I don't want my family subjected to that. I'm writing to tell you my story. I was reading Dave's story, and it's so close to the experience that I had that it actually gave me chills. My first paranormal experience happened to me when I was 4 years old. All the experts say that things that happen to someone before the age of 5 is very hard to remember. The funny thing is that I can remember my experience like it was yesterday. My mother, sister, who's 3 years younger than me, and myself. I remember being asleep in my bed and waking up very suddenly. I looked at the doorway and I saw this full-bodied figure. The only thing is that it was completely white. I'm not talking like white, like a white wall. I'm talking white like energy. This figure to me was a child. The reason I believe this is actually because of its height. I mean, it did not have a face or anything like that. It walked towards me and got on my bed. I remember pulling the blanket up over my head because I was so scared, but I actually felt it on the bed. At that point, I ran screaming and crying into my mom's room. Her boyfriend got up and walked me back to bed to show me there was nothing to be scared of. When we got there, it was gone. Now let's fast forward to the age of 17. By this time in my life, my mom had gotten married, not the same guy from when I was 4, and they had bought a house. It was a tri-level with a full finished basement and a sub-basement. From day one, something felt very odd in the house, almost like a very heavy, unwelcome feeling. The sub-basement was probably the strangest. When you would walk in there, you could see spray paint all over the walls. I know that's not strange, but when you stood in the center of the room, you could see that the spray paint was actually covering up what looked like writing on the walls, and it was also on the floor, so that was kind of creepy. We had 2 dogs that both refused to go into my room and constantly would either stare at the wall and bark, or would stand at the stairs and bark up to the 2nd floor or down the stairs to the basement. The longer I lived in the house, the more I began to feel almost alone. It was like I was becoming isolated mentally from everything. In my room, it would constantly feel as though I was being watched. I would hear loud bangs and things sounding like they were hitting the floor, but nothing would be around. All the motion sensor lights around the outside of the house would turn on all at once for no reason. I mean, I actually began to think I was going crazy. Finally, I broke down and told my stepdad everything that had been going on. He looked at me very seriously. I remember thinking, oh crap, he thinks I'm nuts. He began to tell me about how one night, after I'd gotten home from work, he worked 2nd shift and didn't get home till around 1 a.m. We were sitting on the computer playing a game. At the time, our computer was in the front room, and you could see right up to the stairs and onto the landing where the bedrooms were. He said he saw a man walk out of my room. The man he saw was a taller man in a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt. At first, he thought it was me because he only saw the man out of the corner of his eye. But then he asked how I was doing and looked up and realized the man wasn't me. The man turned and walked back into my room. My stepdad ran up the stairs and opened my door, and I was the only one in there, and I was asleep in a pair of boxers. After my stepdad told me this, I was convinced something was going on. One weekend, while my parents were out of town, I invited 2 of my friends over so we could try to catch stuff on film. Of course, we got absolutely nothing. That is, until we tried to go to sleep. We had all decided to sleep in the basement because there was more room there. We turned off the lights and started to go to sleep. My one friend, Chris, was already asleep, and myself and Dave were talking. All of a sudden, the light to the sub-basement turned on, and we could see what looked like a shadow under the door. You could actually hear what sounded like the work boots walking up the wooden stairs. We woke up Chris, and we all stood at the door. We really thought someone had broken into the house. We opened up the door, prepared to beat the crap out of someone, and there was no one there. We walked downstairs and looked around. We checked the windows and everything. The windows were shut and looked like no one was there. There are a lot of things that happened, but it would be like writing a novel to tell them all. I just thought it was kind of creepy how similar my story is to Dave's. This experience happened when I was in my late 20s, back around late 1994 or early 95. I was laying in bed asleep. I felt something touch my face, and I woke up. I was face to face with a smiling old man. He crawled backwards out of my bed and stood there smiling at me. He looked like he was Caucasian descent, in his 80s at least. He had a glowing light all around him. He looked like he was at peace while staring at me. I have no idea who this was. Furthermore, I don't know why I wasn't afraid of him. He definitely looked scary to me, and I had roommates at the time. I don't know why I didn't go running down the hallway to get someone. I just stayed in bed and stared at him. Again, I wasn't afraid at all. It was almost peaceful. He faded away, and I looked at the clock in front of me. It was 3 a.m. in the morning. I stayed up a little while, and then went back to sleep. How do you talk about something like this? I didn't tell any of my roommates when it happened. I was fearful because I thought I would be outed as a crazy person. I did call my best friend, and thankfully she seemed to believe me. I gave her my rocking chair, and she wanted to make sure the spirit was not standing next to it. So yes, I think she believed me. I've thought about it a lot over the years, trying to figure out who this could have been. I told my grandmother. She's Catholic and thinks it was an angel. I've never met my father, and I have no pictures of him, so I don't know what he looked like. But perhaps, maybe this could have been my father? My mother is Spanish and French, and supposedly, my father was of Caucasian descent like the spirit of the old man. So again, maybe it was the father or grandfather that I never met. Who knows? Since then, I've now had a husband and children. I mentioned it once to my husband. He looked at me like I was crazy, and I'm not allowed to talk about it again. Anyway, thank you for reading my story. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's the best I can do to tell you guys. These are two experiences that happened to me about 5 years ago. Here's the first story. My house is 6 years old and has never been lived in by anyone else. This started about 2 months ago. I'm laying in my bed alone, with the door to the hall and the door to the bathroom open. I swear I see the door open a little bit and then go back to where it was. I then see black figures with little or no shape appear in the doorway. Then whoosh, they are gone. I also saw what looked like people I knew, who will stick their heads in the door and then turn and leave. Last night I was asleep when I felt something nudge me 2 times. I woke up to see this black form standing beside me. It stood there for about 2 seconds, then vanished out the door. The most interesting aspect of this all is that these figures have no legs. They are just a black oval shape with no faces or arms. Just a black form. Last night was the first time it really scared me. I felt like it was the Grim Reaper asking me to follow him. Now on to my next experience, which was even spookier, I might add. I was working in a gym at a hotel in Moodsburn near Glasgow. One night, I was getting ready to leave for the night. The route I had to take was down a dark corridor to the main door. This was a walk I had made many times before, and had never any problems. But this night, as I was going along, I felt like I was being watched. As I got to the end of the corridor, I turned to close the door when I saw what looked like a white shape running towards me. Needless to say, I closed and locked the door very quickly and sprinted to the bus stop outside the hotel. The next night, I was working again and decided to see what could have caused it. I went through every possibility I could have think of, from car headlights to interior lights, but nothing recreated what I had seen. About 2 days later, I was looking through the old accident book when I found an entry from 3 years before. A man was running on the treadmill and died of a heart attack whilst using it. What was interesting was, it was the same date and time of when I saw this incident myself, of the running man. This happened to a friend and I back in the mid-1960s, when we were 12 or 13 years of age each, and we were camping with our church group, and while we had some free time, Alan and me as in Mark, decided to do exploring on our own, so we set off towards the perimeter of the park, where we found a fence that we could easily squeeze through, surrounding the park property. And bordering some large open cow pasture land was a grove of trees right smack in the middle of it. We set off across the pasture land towards the grove of trees, and much to our delight, for it was a hot day, we found a meandering stream in the grove of trees that was about 6 feet deep and about 6 feet wide, and it wandered all throughout the grove. But to our dismay, Alan and I realized that we were wearing blue jean pants and a t-shirt, and had not brought along our swimsuits, since we were not planning on going swimming until later, when the springs in the park was less crowded, so we had nothing to wear to go swimming at that time. But Alan convinced me that there was nobody around to see us, and we could go swimming like they used to do in the old days, by going swimming in the nude, or skinny dipping, and nobody could tell we had nothing on. Once we were in the water, and not wanting to be labeled a coward or chicken by my friend, I quickly got undressed, and we dove into the cool water. We swam around in the water for about 15 minutes, when we were startled to see a young boy, about our age, dressed in some dusty old-fashioned looking overalls, and barefoot, staring at Alan and me from the bushes. And even though he probably saw we were both skinny dipping by our clothes hanging from the bushes, neither Alan or me felt embarrassed about it. After all of us were boys, and Alan got bold, but staying in the water, Alan said hi to him. The boy came out of the bushes, but didn't get near the banks, and he just stared at Alan and me for a solid 20 seconds. All we could think to do was ask him if he wanted to go swimming with us, but at this point, I don't think we realized it was a ghost at the moment. We just always thought it was a kid that always hung around this area and just wanted to play because we were playing around. But then, it was like he had simply vanished again. Helen and I did not wear glasses, and our vision was perfect. and were looking straight at the boy as we climbed out of the stream. And like I said, the boy just disappeared before our very eyes. Just kind of blinked out of sight. And Alan and I quickly got into our jeans and looked around for him, but he was nowhere to be found in the bushes. And if he wanted to play with us, why did he disappear? And if he had left the grove of trees, which he didn't, we would have seen him in the open pasture land. And afterwards, we talked about our experience between us, but Alan and I didn't tell anyone of this, knowing that no one would ever believe us. Alan and I both wondered if the boy might have fallen into the stream from the crumbling banks and drowned in that stream many years ago. And as the kids our age wouldn't be caught dead wearing old-fashioned looking overalls, when all the kids we knew were wearing the latest looking fashions, was it even remotely possible that perhaps Alan and me saw a ghost that day? One who was lonely and just wanted to play. I worked at a place called Dowling as a janitor for a year. My shift was overnight, and for 3 months, I worked that shift alone. I never saw a purple orb, but I did spend a lot of time outside. What I can tell you is that after the creepiness of being in a big building all alone wears off, there are still sounds and such that can't be explained by me. Every week, if not every night, doors would open and close by themselves. Me and the others would go chasing these noises, thinking there was someone in the building, but of course, there was no one there, or I wouldn't be writing to you. And the security company wouldn't call to say an external alarm went off, so there couldn't have been anyone there. Sometimes we'd be in the library, and we'd hear one of the counselor's doors open and close. The library was the same room, but divided by office walls from the counselor area. Sometimes the classroom doors would as well. At times, I'd be in the gym and would chase the sound of footsteps. The place does make a lot of building noises. It's difficult to report on anything I heard in the auditorium, the creepiest place in the school, because the roof and heating systems would collaborate with the big empty space to make many mysterious noises that could be too easy to explain away. Plus, the auditorium was creepy because it was always dark until I would clean it, and there were so many access areas, such as backstage or the lighting area above the stage, and the several doors that would really just make me paranoid. Having said all that, I did sometimes get transfixed on the idea that an emaciated naked woman was watching me. I only got that feeling in or around that particular room. It makes no sense to me, but I did avoid it. The band room was also a little creepy. I would sometimes take my lunch there so I could listen to the radio, and the doors within would make noises like they were opening and shutting. There was one definitive time that I also couldn't explain. I went into the library and locked the door behind me because I was hearing so many noises around that door that night. Then, I climbed over the wall to the counselor's area and unlocked that door so I could rush through it when I heard the noise. Sure enough, the library door tried to open because I heard the deadbolt hit the door frame. So I ran to the hall and listened for footsteps, but there were none. I ran to look down both north and south halls along the library. There was nobody, and there was nowhere to hide. I didn't think someone could have gotten away like that, not in that manner anyway, without making enough noise for me to hear it. A similar thing happened one night when all 3 of the overnight janitors were in there. We heard the noises in the counselor's area, so I climbed the wall while the other guys went to the doors, but nobody was there. I want to assure you of 2 things, even though these aren't really the most impressive tales. First, I don't really believe in ghosts. I'm open enough to the idea, I guess, but anytime I heard a noise, I would go looking for somebody because I assumed it was an intruder. There were times we had intruders, and times people who had rights to the building were found. However, there were so many times that we were sure there were noises, and so little chance for whoever was making them to escape, and we still found nothing, that I thought you might be interested to hear the story of Dowling from someone who was there for a long time. The building stopped creeping me out by itself about a week after I was working there alone. I heard voices and chased them, but the air unit, the building setting, and other normal noises stopped giving me the jitters by the time they became normal for me. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I saw the purple orb listed on the website after a night of chasing these noises, so I decided to write this to you, albeit 2 years after the fact. Last thing I want to say, there are 2 creepy stories about the place from a source that I'm not sure I trust, but I'll tell you anyway. One time, this guy saw people in robes walking into the woods west of the building. Another time, a girl was taken advantage of in the auditorium. A funny, unbelievable, but true story from the overnight shift. Ninjas attacked the school one night and put one of the soccer goals in the atrium. The kids did this for their overnight prank. They seriously climbed onto the roof of the school with 2 of the school's regulation-sized soccer goals and dumped them into the atrium. I chased off a bunch of kids when they were trying to get on the roof a 3rd time. They were all dressed like ninjas. My name is Carly, and I used to live in a 100-year-old house on the Eastern Shore in Maryland. This house was on a street with about 10 other houses, all closely related in shape and size, except my friend's. She's my best friend, and the man who had built all the houses in our street lived in hers. They have never had any bad experiences in theirs, up until now. My friend's older sister came back for Thanksgiving, and she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a form of a giant man. The man closely resembled Andre the Giant, even though she thought it was her boyfriend. When she looked next to her, he was sleeping. She really didn't think too much more about it until the next day, where the rest of the family shared that they had been hearing and seeing things too. My house was only a few years younger than hers. My parents bought it at an auction because the whole thing had to be gutted and renewed. As my dad was working on it, he was putting in new windows one day and saw a man. He was crouched down with his face right up against the wall, looking at the window he had just put in. The man saw my dad get up and disappeared. I've had my own experiences too. Like, we used to hear someone running up and down the halls at night. My room was right at the end, and my bed looked out the door. When the person got to the end, you could hear them turn around and run back. That wasn't too bad though. I also remember going into my room and saw a crowd of people. They were all dark figures with the outline of a trench coat that were so long you couldn't see their feet. They slowly faded away, and I didn't go back in the room for weeks. I would stay in the other guest's bedroom. I had a great aunt, and she was a psychic. I loved her. We had the strongest bond you could ever have with anyone. She died of cancer, and it was terribly hard on me. I ended up with some things of hers, like her tarot cards, but most importantly, her angel cards. I'd just gotten these, and I was up in my room playing with them when I pulled up one card that had a picture of a lady on it. This lady looked exactly like my aunt, and she was surrounded by animals. My aunt had a basement full of bunnies, birds, fish. She had 5 cats and 5 dogs. The message on the card said, "A message from your loved one. I'm fine, very happy now. Don't worry about me, and don't forget about me. but don't let me overtake your life. Then it said goodbye, and I love you on it too. After I read that, I teared up and ran downstairs. I showed my mom, and she couldn't even believe it. I couldn't believe it either, so I got scared and told my mom to take the cards out of my room, just in case. My mom put it on her dresser. They were there for about a week or two, and then they disappeared. My mom never moved them, and neither did anybody else. No one had touched them, and they had just vanished. I'm for sure that was her final message to me. Maybe not forever, but just so I wouldn't worry. It was her proper goodbye. The week before Thanksgiving, my son and I were emptying out a house that was to be torn down and this new one brought in. We were standing by my pickup truck, which we were loading, and he happened to look at a bright light in the sky and said, "Hey, look at that. Is it a plane?" I looked up, and there were no flashing lights, just looked like a wide set of headlights, no other colored lights. I thought at first it was a plane, but no sound for as low as it seemed. It came over slow and headed east, and I thought it would disappear, like over the trees, like the planes that come over do. But instead, it went up, and did so very quickly, until it was a speck that disappeared. I still wonder what it was. Was it a paranormal entity, like an orb or some sort? Or maybe something different, like even a UFO? It's hard to say. But back in 1990, my husband and I were talking outside and happened to look at the edge of our 40 acres. There, just above the trees, was a long cigar-shaped object that covered the entire line of the 40-acre parcel. It had flashing lights and looked like windows were along the side of it. It was reported in the newspaper, as a lot of people saw it that same night. It made no sound at all. My son passed away in August 2008, and I've had my grandson say that he sees him in my bathroom. I find that strange. Last week he came to me and his mother and said that there was a man in my bathroom and he needed to put his clothes on. When I found my son, he was naked. My grandson didn't see him that way, the way he passed away. He has told me many times that there are ghosts in my house. We have heard doors open and close, and sometimes the floor's creaking. Like last fall, I'd gone in my bathroom to turn off the lights the kids left on. I called out to him, thinking that maybe someone was still in the bathroom. Finally, I said loudly and impatiently, "Who is in here?" I heard a voice distinctly said, "I am," very quietly and clear. I didn't recognize the voice and thought one of the kids were playing a joke on me. No one was near the bathroom, which is just off my master bedroom. It didn't scare me. There are other strange things that happen in my house. We hear little kids outside talking. Most of the time, it is indirect, and you can't make out what they say, and other times, something comes in clear. We just think the land is haunted. These incidents happened around 1984 or 1985 in Baltimore, Maryland. I was in my early 20s and on my way to meet a shuttle bus that would take me to my job in Washington, D.C. It was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I was driving down Windsor Mill Road, going towards Woodland, Maryland. As you drive down that hilly road, it kind of feels creepy because you pass an old graveyard that sits across the street from a small patch of old, single-family homes. As I drove, I looked over at one house in particular, and I saw a young girl. She appeared to be about 10 years of age. She was extremely pale, and her hair was long in bright red. She was alone, sitting on the steps. What really stood out, though, was the way she was dressed. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress and black granny-style boots that buttoned up. The clothes looked like something people would have worn in the 1800s. She just kind of sat there, with no expression on her face, staring across the street at the graveyard. I was really puzzled seeing her. First, because of the clothes she was wearing, and second, because it was extremely hot that day. We were experiencing a heat wave. It was at least 85 to 90 degrees. I figured she was just a kid playing dress up, and maybe her parents weren't aware that she was outside in the oppressive heat, dressed in those heavy clothes. I went on to work and didn't think any more about it. I took the same route every day and didn't see her again until about 3 to 4 months later. I was driving down that same road, and when I came upon that house, I noticed a group of kids in front of the house playing a very lively game of tag, laughing and chasing each other. I looked closely, and there was the redhead girl running along as if she were playing with them. I say as if, because it seemed like the other kids were not playing with her. It looked like they didn't know she was even there. There was no direct interaction between her and the other kids. The kids would run one way, and she would run too, but not with them. She looked like she was playing by herself. I can't explain it any other way. It was just weird. She wore the same old-fashioned clothes that she had on the first time I saw her. I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A year passed. I changed jobs and forgot about the sightings until one day I was having a discussion about the paranormal with my mother. She was born in the South and had experienced her fair share of paranormal sightings. I began to tell her about my sighting, and she quickly interrupted me and described what the girl looked like and what she was wearing. She told me that she had seen the girl before and assured me that my eyes were not playing tricks on me. That is because I had indeed seen a ghost. I've driven down that road several times since then, but I've never seen the red-haired girl again. I've spent most of my life growing up in Hartsdale, New York, a block away from the Ferncliff Cemetery, directly behind the old cemetery flower shop. When I was younger, and our family first moved into the house, my mother would yell at my father, blaming him for leaving the door to the basement open, claiming that my sister and I could easily fall down the stairs and hurt ourselves. My father would always deny it was him who was opening the door. It couldn't have been my sister and I, because the bolt to keep the door closed was too high for us to reach at that age. My father wanted to test if it could be someone else. My mother, my father, sister, and I all went into the guest room to watch a movie one night, around the times of the door constantly being opened. Before the movie started, my father went downstairs to check and make sure the door was closed and the bolt was locked. Halfway through the movie, he went downstairs and realized that the bolt was undone and the door was wide open. My mother had to have priests come over one day and do whatever it is they do when there are signs of a ghost in a house. Clearly, it didn't work. Or maybe there's different spirits because that instance isn't the only time. One day, around the time we were about to remodel the kitchen, I walked into the house and my mother was looking at me like she'd seen a ghost. That's because she actually saw this white form of a little girl running up the stairs and into my bedroom. Often, I've come home and heard voices or whispers. I would yell out that I'm home to inform whoever, thinking my mother or someone else was home, that I'd come back from school. I would then go around the house and realize no one was there. At first, I would think there were thieves who broke in and hid. Eventually, I realized this was a common occurrence and did not want to be home alone by myself because of this. My mother has heard voices too. When I moved away for a while to live in New Jersey, I would get frantic phone calls for my mother to come home to visit her because she would constantly hear voices and objects would move on their own. One night, the most terrified I ever heard my mother. She said she did not get any sleep because she kept hearing things, objects moving about, and then the wireless doorbell she had recently installed went off at around 2 or 3 a.m. She went as far as to take the batteries out, but the bell continued ringing for a good half an hour or so. I believe she said her bed was shaking too before any of this happened. Books had flown off the shelves and across the room in my sister's bedroom. This has happened on several occasions. I also recall as a child my toys moving on their own and me just telling myself that it was all my imagination because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, resulting in me just hiding under my covers until sunrise. Finally, I know this is probably just a weird coincidence, but the day my old refrigerator died was ironically the same day the elderly grandmother of the previous owners died. She was very fond of that old fridge and was very upset that the family didn't take it with them to the next house they moved off to. I just considered it an odd occurrence, but whatever. The dang thing was as old as time, so I was surprised it even lasted as long as it did. Oh, and while we're on the subject of the paranormal, the Ferncliff Cemetery. Never had a problem with it until one night I was walking through. My friends and I would always cut through the cemetery to get to one another's houses, because it was safer than walking on the main and busy streets. Usually, we would go in packs, or if alone, during the daytime. I don't anymore because, well, besides the fact I can drive now, one night, when the moon was full and you could clearly see that no one was around, except for the field of graves, I constantly heard voices whispering. I would constantly look around, thinking maybe it was some teenagers drinking. That's what kids used to do in town, drink in the cemetery, but no one was anywhere in sight. I know my house in this town and area near the cemetery is not the only one that has or is still being haunted. On the other side of the cemetery, in White Plains, there is another house near where my mom's friend lives. The mother thought the son was making up an imaginary friend that he would talk to, until one day she saw for herself an apparition of an elderly man. He rose up from the ground of the room she has her washer and dryer in, and then he vanished. My name's Patrick, and I submitted a story to the site about 5 or 6 years ago of some things that happened to me back when I was in college, but I wanted to submit a more recent story of mine as well. About 3 years ago, I purchased the house I live in now, which is a 1940s Cape Cod in a suburb of Pittsburgh. The land upon which my neighborhood sits is the site of the post-revolutionary military installation known as Legionville, which is where General Mad Anthony Wayne trained the first peacetime U.S. Army. The first night I slept in my house, I woke up about 3 or 4 a.m. with the light next to my bed turned on. Now, I'm a light sleeper and need total dark to fall asleep. I figured I must have turned the light on in my sleep, so I turned it off and went back to sleep. The next night, I woke up again at 3 or 4 a.m. and the same light was turned on. I was a little weirded out with this occurrence, but shut the light off and went back to sleep. The next night I made sure I was going to sleep with the light off, moved the light all the way to the other side of the nightstand, and slept all the way on the opposite side of my queen-size bed. Sure enough, at 3 or 4 a.m., I woke up and the light was on. What weirded me out more than the experiences of waking up with the light on is the fact that it completely stopped after I confronted it. Fast forward about 3 months. I have a career which allows me to work from my office at home for much of the time. I was in the second bedroom, which I converted to my office, doing some paperwork around 3 p.m. I heard a door downstairs open and could sense that someone was in the house. I figured it was my parents, who have a habit of letting themselves in on unannounced visits. I called down, "I'm up here," to them, but received no response. I went to the top of the steps and yelled down, "Hello," and nobody answered. At that point, I heard the door to my kitchen slam shut, and loud, heavy footsteps run down into my basement. I ran outside of the house and called the police, as I was certain there was an intruder. From the sidewalk across the street, I observed the house while waiting for the cops to arrive. I have a front door, a garage door, and a side door, all of which are visible from the street. Nobody exited the house during this time. 2 police officers showed up and seared my house, but found nobody. The strangest part of this occurrence is that the door I heard slam, which is at the top of my basement steps in my kitchen, was locked. That door locks with a deadbolt. It is the type where you cannot lock it behind you and shut the door. You have to either lock it from the kitchen side or with a key on the basement steps side. I clearly heard the door slam shut, and then steps ran down to the basement, but the door was locked from the kitchen side. At that point, I decided to have a priest do a house blessing. For the next few months, nothing that degree would happen. However, I would be in bed late at night, just at the point where I'm about to doze off, and would hear a male and female talking. It's just like when you were a kid and were sent to bed when the adults are still up talking downstairs. I could hear voices back and forth, but could not make out what they were saying. I'd get up out of bed to listen closer, but the voices would stop. I made sure to check to see if I was catching the neighbors talking or left a TV or radio on, but never found an explanation. After those few months, all activity stopped altogether. I never really did figure things out, but as long as it stays quiet, I'm happy. I've had an encounter with an invisible thing, such as what was posted in the first Lowing, Texas post. It was on my great uncle's farms, Uncle Nut. Have no idea why they called him that, out near Elgin, Texas. We were visiting, and I got bored of the grown-up talk, so I went out past the barn, and their dog went with me. We went out about 50 yards from the back of the barn, and we were looking for bugs and such. The dog was fine, I was fine, and all was good. The fields and woods we were in had short grass, and all the trees looked about the same age, and the trunks were maybe a foot around each. The trees were spaced roughly about 10 to 20 feet apart, or more, and you could easily see through and past them without any problems. More trees were behind them about the same distance, but there would be no way a person could move from behind one tree to another without being seen. The dog was fine, I was fine, and all was good. Well, pretty soon, all that changed. I started feeling like something big was up ahead of me in the dark, maybe 100 feet or more. I looked, nothing in sight. Shake it off. Keep bug hunting. Nope, something is there. Can't see it, but but something is there. Then, a loud grunt-like noise from ahead of us sounded deep like a bull or buffalo. Still can't see anything, but the hair is standing up on my neck. I move my position to get a better view, and as I do, the dog moves closer to me and let out a low growl, which is answered by another loud grunt, but slowly closer. Now I can hear grass and leaves being crunched, and can definitely tell where the sound is coming from, but still nothing but trees and grass ahead of us. Those trees can't hide a bull and buffalo, and as I look forward, I see some of the grass moving, but there isn't any wind. It's like I'm in a vacuum. I look down at the dog, he looks at me, and whatever is ahead of us comes closer. This time, not a step, but a faster pace. I'm still looking at the dog, and he at me. We hear a gurgly, ugly sounding grunt, and whatever it is coming on strong at a good speed. I look up and see Bart get knocked off the side of a tree and decide I've had enough. I look down to the dog who is already hauling you-know-what back to the barn. I took off and actually got to the barn before the dog did. Neither one of us stopped at the barn as we both headed straight to the house. Whatever that was in those woods was chasing after us, snorting and stomping as I was running after us. I've been chased by a bull before and vividly remember the sounds associated with that experience, but stopped before it got to the barn. At least I think so. But it still sounded like a bulldozer crashing around out there when I turned back towards the field and woods once I got to the house. It was something. I went in and told my great uncle about what happened, and he got all worried and said, "Oh, we don't go out there," and that's all he said. I later looked, and on the back of the barn was painted this weird symbol, like a pair of glasses, like an infinity sign, but with some other marks as well. Nope, I didn't go out to the field again and press my luck, and the dog spent the rest of my stay under the old house. Hi, my name is Lee, and I'd like to share my recent haunting experiences with you all. I'm Australian, recently moved to Ireland, and during my first week here, I was staying at the Dublin International Hostel. I was staying in a dorm with 9 other women. However, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright. I didn't have any trace of sleepiness, and after looking around for a few seconds, I heard someone whisper Ella in my ear, clear as day. I thought it might have been one of the other women, but looking around, I saw that everyone else was asleep. The next day I asked at the front desk about the history of the hostel, and apparently it used to be an orphanage, go figure right, and a school for the local area, and the good folks at the front desk told me there has been a fair share of people reported spooky things. Next, I arrived at my new house, new job working as a nanny. I got to know the children and got to know the story of the family. The father's parents had passed away before the children were born. One day, I came into the room to find the oldest daughter, who is 4, talking away to herself. I asked her what she was doing. She said that she was talking to Granny Teresa at the window. I asked her if she was there right now, and she said that she was gone now, but Granny Teresa knows all about you. You're staying in her room. I got the chills like you wouldn't believe. The parents told me that she often says she's talking to her Granny Teresa. Another time, it was just myself and the baby, she's 2, in the house, and we were just playing away when she stood up, went to the staircase and said, "Hello? Hello," with a big smile on her face. I asked her who she was talking to, and she just pointed to the top of the staircase and started chattering away in baby to the person at the top of the stairs. At other times, I've heard footsteps on the upper floor when it's just me in the house on the bottom floor, and sometimes in the room I sleep in, it gets unbearably cold. I wonder, who was Ella? Has anyone else stayed at the Dublin International Hostel and had any ghostly visitors? I wonder if the girls are actually talking to their granny, or if they're just pretending to feel close to her. It's still creepy either way. Psst. Hey. Yeah, you. This is a disembodied voice imploring you to subscribe and share this video. I used to be like you. A complete human, had so many obligations on my mind, but now that I'm a ghost, I know that all that matters is that you can share this video. As a phantom, I can't share and interact with the world. It takes a lot of energy, if you know what I mean. But since you guys are the portal to the underworld, I don't know what that means, but even as a ghost, it makes no sense. You guys can still help. So why don't you share and subscribe to this video? Because the ghost, this disembodied voice, this phantom, would appreciate it. Please, please, I hope you like the compilation. And I hope you have a good night or day, whichever comes first. I laugh too. Didn't you think ghosts laugh? Yeah, they do. But I'm more of a happy, frolicky ghost. The one that'll tuck you in at night if you're scared and hold you dearly. Anyway, that sounded weird, even as a ghost. So I'm gonna go. Love you guys, and see you in the next video.